I moved into the new house on a Tuesday, which felt about right for how my life was going. Tuesday is a day that doesn't promise much. It just quietly shows up between the memory of Monday and the hope of Friday and does its job. The moving truck had already pulled away, leaving faint tracks on the cold pavement. Inside the house smelled like a mix of fresh paint and cardboard, with just a hint of the previous owner's detergent clinging to the closets. It was the kind of place that would look warm and welcoming if you filled it with the right people and the right memories. I didn't have either of those yet, so it just looked new, too new. I stood in the front hallway with my overnight bag at my feet and a box labeled Kitchen Essentials under my hand, listening to the quiet. There was a hum from the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the thermostat, and nothing else. No music, no voices, no TV. Just stillness. For a moment, I let that stillness settle around me like a blanket. My shoulders relaxed a little, my jaw unclenched. I took a slow breath in through my nose and out through my mouth and told myself this was what I wanted, a calm, neutral space where the season couldn't get in. Then I made the mistake of looking out the front window. The neighborhood had not received the neutral memo. Across the street, a 2-story house was already wrapped in white lights from gutters to garden fence, the kind that looked like someone traced the outline of the place with a glowing pen. Next door to that, a family was wrestling a spruce tree off the roof of their SUV, laughing loudly enough that the sound floated right through my dual-paned windows. Even the small bungalow on the corner had a glowing reindeer on the lawn, its head slowly bobbing as if grazing on invisible grass. It was early December. Of course it was. I stood there and watched the lights blinking red, green, and gold and felt that familiar little pinch in my chest, the one that arrived every year about now. It was the feeling of being slightly out of step with the rest of the world, like the music everyone else could hear was playing just a bit too far away for me to catch the rhythm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't have to look to know who it was. "Hey, Mom," I said, answering anyway. "Tell me you're calling about something normal, like taxes." Her laugh came through the speaker, warm and familiar. "Oh, honey, no one calls about taxes in December. Are you in the house?" "Just stepped in," I replied, glancing around at the bare walls. "Very exciting. White walls, gray floors, boxes everywhere. It's like living inside a minimalist catalog that hasn't decided who it is yet." "You'll make it yours," she said. "I know you will." "So, have you talked to your sister?" There it was. 3 minutes and she was already circling. "About what?" I asked, even though I knew. "About Christmas," she said gently. "You know, that little holiday where families get together and eat too much sugar and argue over board games," I finished for her. She sighed, and I could picture her sitting at her kitchen table, one hand wrapped around a mug of tea, the other fiddling at the edge of a placemat. "Eric, she really wants you there this year. We all do." I walked slowly into the living room, my footsteps soft on the new flooring. The room was a simple rectangle with a fireplace on one wall and a big front window on the other. It could have held a perfect Christmas tree. It probably had for the family before me. But right now, it held only a rolled-up rug, a stack of sealed boxes, and my stubbornness. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "I just moved. I've got a deadline. You know how it is." She knew how it was, because I had told her often enough. I was Eric Redford, best-selling author of a series of books about the bachelor lifestyle. Clean lines, solo travel, no obligations. I'd built a career on the idea that commitment was optional and independence was everything. Lately, though, even the words bachelor lifestyle made something inside me go quiet and tired. "You always have a deadline," she said, but without accusation. "Deadlines don't hug you. Deadlines don't spill hot chocolate on your socks." "Strong argument against hot chocolate," I murmured, but there was a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. She heard it. "I'm just saying," she continued, "it would mean the world to Chelsea and Liam if their Uncle Eric came for Christmas. They ask about you. A lot." My chest softened for a moment at the thought of my niece and nephew. Chelsea with her endless stories, Liam with those big, serious eyes. It had been too long. Work and book tours, and, if I was honest, strategic avoidance had kept me away more than it should have. "I'll think about it," I said, which we both knew was code for probably not. She was quiet for a beat, then changed her tone. "All right," she said, in the overly bright way she used when she was not all right. "I don't want to keep you. You have unpacking to do. We'll talk later, okay?" "Okay," I said softly. "Love you." "Love you too," she replied. "Don't forget to eat something real, not just coffee." The call ended, and the house was quiet again. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My shoulders lifted, then slowly dropped. In, out. The kind of breathing I'd been told to do when my head got too noisy. "Okay," I murmured to the empty room. "Let's get you at least halfway functional." I opened the box labeled Kitchen, Essentials, pulling out a mug, a spoon, a small bag of coffee, a chipped plate, and a single skillet. The basics. I moved slowly, not rushing, letting my body get used to the dimensions of the space, where the counters began and ended, how the light fell across the floor from the small window over the sink. Every now and then I glanced out through the front window. More lights were appearing along the street. Someone had set up a projector that threw gentle snowflake patterns across their garage door, the shapes drifting slowly like lazy stars. Even from inside, I could see the faint glow of a wreath 2 doors down. I told myself it was just decoration, color, and light. Harmless. Still, a part of me tightened, remembering another December, another house, another kind of light. I pushed the thought away like closing a book halfway through a painful chapter. Not tonight. Not in this new place. I turned on the kettle and listened to the low, rising sound as the water warmed. There's something grounding about that small, ordinary noise, the way it builds and then settles. As it heated, I leaned on the counter, closed my eyes for a moment, and just listened to the kettle, to my own breathing, to the muffled world outside. A knock on the front door made me jump. My eyes opened. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one even knew me here yet. The knock came again, 3 quick taps, and then a 4th, like a cheerful little drum routine. I took my time walking to the door, feeling a tiny, unreasonable flicker of hope that maybe it was a delivery person who had mixed up addresses and I could send them away and keep my bubble intact. When I opened the door, The cold air slipped gently around my ankles, carrying with it the faint smell of snow that hadn't quite arrived yet, and a much stronger scent of pine and something sugary. On my front step stood a man about my age, maybe a little older, with a knit hat pushed back on his head and a wide smile that looked completely at home on his face. He was holding a plastic storage tub full of tangled lights and a roll of red ribbon that had come partially unraveled, looping around his wrist like a festive bracelet. "You must be Eric," he said, as if we'd already met. "I'm Conrad. Next door." He jerked his thumb toward the house to my right, where a wreath the size of a small satellite dish hung proudly on the front door. "I am indeed Eric," I replied, automatically polite. "And I see you're winning Christmas." He laughed, a big, easy sound that spilled out onto my quiet porch. "We do pretty well," he said, clearly pleased. "Welcome to the block. I figured I should introduce myself before your house gets claimed." "Claimed?" "By one of the unofficial committees," he said. "Cookie exchange, caroling route, luminary setup team, you name it. This cul-de-sac loves a list. I thought I'd get to you first as your self-appointed ambassador of festive overachievement." I blinked, then smiled beside myself. "Well, Ambassador, you should know I'm planning a very low-profile season. I'm probably the wrong guy for over anything." He tilted his head, studying me with friendly curiosity. "You just moved in today, right? Tell you what, we'll save the hard sell for later. For now, I'm just here to say hello, bring you this." He reached into the tub and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped box about the size of my hand. The paper was simple brown craft, tied with red string. "And issue a non-binding, totally optional invitation." I accepted the box almost automatically. It was surprisingly warm, and the sugary smell grew stronger. "Cookies?" I guessed. "Shortbread," he confirmed. "Neighborhood tradition. Everyone gets a welcome box. If you open them now, they go great with unpacking. If you open them later, they go even better with denial about unpacking." "I'm more of a denial guy," I said, feeling a little of the tension in my chest loosen. "Good," he said. "You'll fit in right." He shifted the tub of lights to his other hip and nodded toward my roofline. "So here's the optional part. This street has a kind of theme going. We like to link our lights, make it feel like one long string that runs from corner to corner. Your place is right in the middle, so you're sort of a keystone. No pressure." "Only the fate of the entire street's aesthetic," I murmured. "Exactly," he said cheerfully. "Look, we've got extra lights, timers, the works. If you're up for it, I can help you put them up. If you're not, that's okay too. We'll just pretend you're doing a very experimental, avant-garde dark house in the middle art installation." I hesitated, fingers resting on the warm little box of shortbread. The idea of climbing onto the roof to attach twinkling lights felt complicated. On one hand, it was just decoration. On the other, it was an invitation to participate in something I wasn't sure I trusted yet. "I tell you what," I said finally. "I'll think about it." He nodded, unbothered. "Totally fair. We're putting ours up tomorrow afternoon. People drift in and out, no formal schedule. If you hear bad Christmas karaoke and smell hot cocoa, that's us. Stop by if you feel like it." He took a step back, then paused. "Oh, and hey, my wife makes an unreasonable amount of chili for these things. If you don't have dinner plans, you do now. There's always a spare bowl. I started to protest, then realized I didn't actually have a good reason beyond instinct. The idea of a warm meal I didn't have to cook tugged at me more than I wanted to admit. "I'll see how the unpacking goes," I said, which was as close to maybe as I could get without tipping into yes. "Perfect," he said, as if I'd just agreed. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Eric. You picked a good street." He headed back down the path, humming some cheerful tune under his breath, storage tub bumping lightly against his leg. I watched him go, then looked at the small, neat box in my hands. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling the cool air on my face, the warmth of the cookies seeping into my palms. My breath puffed out in faint white clouds, slow and even. In, out. The world around me was busy with light and sound, but up close, on my quiet porch, it felt soft and distant, like background music turned low. I closed the door gently and walked back into the kitchen. The kettle whistled faintly, just on the edge of boiling. I turned off the stove, poured hot water over a tea bag in my mug, and set the cookie box on the counter. Steam rose in slow spirals from the cup. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, letting the heat sink into my fingers. For a long moment, I did nothing but stand there, breathing in the scent of tea and sugar and cardboard and fresh paint, feeling my body gradually let go of the tension of the day. This house didn't know me yet. The walls were blank, the shelves were empty. But as I took a sip of tea and opened the box to find neat rows of golden shortbread, I had the faint, reluctant sense that maybe it could be a place where things were different. Different didn't have to mean dramatic. It could just mean quieter, softer around the edges. My phone buzzed again, skittering slightly across the counter. I glanced at the screen and saw my editor's name. I let it go to voicemail. The blinking cursor on the new manuscript would still be there tomorrow, patiently waiting for me to decide what kind of man I wanted to be on the page this time. Right now, it was enough to lean against the counter, feel my heartbeat slow, and watch the sky outside the window deepen from pale gray to early evening blue. Somewhere down the street, someone turned on another string of lights. Their glow reflected faintly on the glass, a soft shimmer like distant stars. I watched them for a while, not quite ready to join in, but not quite looking away either. Eventually, when the tea had cooled and the cookies were half gone, I pushed away from the counter and walked into the living room. I unrolled the rug, set it roughly where a couch would someday go, and sat down on the floor, legs stretched out in front of me. The room felt big and a little empty, but not unfriendly. I let my head rest against the wall, eyes drifting half-closed, breath slowing to a gentle, steady rhythm. In the distance, someone laughed, the sound softened by walls and snow-heavy air. The heater clicked on with a comforting sigh. "I'm just here for a quiet December," I murmured to the ceiling. No big changes, no big feelings. The house didn't answer, of course. It just held my weight, my breath, my stubborn plans. Outside, the neighborhood lights lowed softly against the early winter sky, patient and unhurried, as if they knew something I didn't yet know. And there, in that first evening in a new house, with a mug cooling beside me, and the taste of butter and sugar lingering on my tongue, I let my eyes drift shut for a moment and simply rested, unaware of just how much this December would ask me to rewrite. The next morning, the house woke up before I did. Not with noise, there was very little of that, but with light. Pale winter daylight slipped around the edges of the bedroom curtains and stretched slowly across the floor, inching its way toward the bed. I lay there on my back for a while, eyes half open, watching the soft glow move, letting my breathing find a slow, even rhythm. In for a quiet count of 4, out for a quiet count of 6. No alarm, no rushing, just the quiet creak of a house settling into the day. When I finally sat up, the room felt both unfamiliar and slightly more mine than it had the night before. My suitcase sat open on the chair. A few shirts hung crookedly in the open closet, like they were trying out the space before committing. I rubbed a hand over my face, felt the faint scratch of stubble, and listened. The neighborhood had its own early morning soundtrack. A car engine turning over somewhere down the street, a dog barking twice, then going silent again, the distant scrape of a shovel on a driveway, metal on concrete in slow, patient strokes. Underneath all of it, the low, steady hum of the heater, breathing warm air into my new rooms. I swung my feet to the floor, feeling the coolness of the wood under my heels before they found the edge of the rug. The contrast, cool, then soft, was oddly grounding. It made me aware of my body in a way that wasn't stressful, just present. In the kitchen, yesterday's mug still sat by the sink, a faint ring of tea drying at the bottom. The little box of shortbread, now half empty, waited on the counter like a quiet reminder that the world outside these walls had already decided I was part of something, whether I agreed or not. I filled the kettle again and set it on the stove, the click of the burner and the soft whoosh of gas catching sounding louder than they really were in the quiet room. As the water began to warm, I leaned against the counter and let my shoulders drop. There was a weight in my chest that wasn't exactly heavy, more like a folded blanket I hadn't figured out how to put away. Christmas. Family. The book. I glanced toward the living room where my laptop sat on a small folding table, lid closed, waiting. The new manuscript file lived inside that screen, currently containing 3 sentences and a blinking cursor that seemed, somehow, disappointed in me. Another book about the joys of remaining unattached. Another list of clever ways to avoid commitment. Another love letter to a lifestyle that no longer felt like it belonged to me. The kettle's low hum grew into a soft rattle. I poured hot water over a fresh tea bag, and watched the color bloom slowly, spiraling out from the center. It was an easy thing to focus on, gentle enough that my mind could rest there for a moment, without leaping ahead to deadlines and expectations. My phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at the screen. Mom again. I exhaled through my nose, a long, slow breath, and picked it up. If she was calling this early, it was either important or she had decided to escalate her Christmas campaign. Possibly both. "Hey, Mom," I said, softening my voice more than I meant to. "Hi, sweetheart," she replied, and right away I heard something different. Her voice sounded thinner, a little rough around the edges, like it had traveled a long way through a tunnel. She cleared her throat, coughed lightly. "You okay?" I asked, frowning. "You sound off." "Oh, it's nothing," she said quickly. "Just a little bug. The doctor says it's one of those silly winter things. I've got tea, I've got a blanket, I've got daytime television. I'll live." I straightened a little, the tea in my own hand growing suddenly less soothing. "Bug, as in cold? Flu? Have you been to the doctor?" "Yes, yes," she said, waving off my concern with the sound of rustling fabric. "Don't fuss. I'm fine. I do have one small favor to ask, though." There it was. The folded blanket in my chest shifted. "All right," I said, carefully. "What's the favor?" She hesitated, and I could picture her pressing her lips together, choosing her words. "When I talked to your sister last night, they were still stuck in Norway. The snowstorm's worse than they thought. Flights are canceled left and right. They might be delayed for several more days." I pictured my sister and her husband sitting in some Scandinavian airport, surrounded by tired travelers and blinking departure boards, while outside the windows the world turned white. "Okay," I said slowly. "That's not great, but they'll get home eventually." "Yes," she said softly. "But in the meantime, I was supposed to have Chelsea and Liam here with me. For our usual pre-Christmas sleepovers, gingerbread, movies, the works." I could almost see it, my mother's small house filled with the sound of children's laughter, the smell of cookie dough, the glow of colored lights. It was a familiar scene, one I usually watched from a distance, like a picture leaning against a wall that I hadn't quite hung. "Right," I said. "You mentioned that." "Well," she continued, and there was a faint, theatrically tragic sigh in her voice, "the doctor is being very unreasonable about the whole thing. He says I should rest. No running after little ones for a few days, no late-night movies, no frosting fights in the kitchen." I let out a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. "Did you tell him you've been doing that since before he was born?" "Yes," she said primly. "He didn't seem impressed." There was a small pause. I knew my mother. This was the part where she would slide the real question across the table. "So," she said lightly, "I was thinking maybe Uncle Eric could step in for a little while." I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the cupboard door behind me, letting it thump gently. "Mom!" "They look up to you, you know. Chelsea's been reading your book jackets like they're treasure maps. I keep telling her your stories are for grown-ups, but she just likes seeing your name." A warmth bloomed somewhere under the folded blanket in my chest, my name in my niece's small hands, my nephew's serious eyes watching me. "How long are we talking?" I asked cautiously. "Just a few days," she said. "Maybe more if the airports stay closed, but we'll take it one day at a time. I'm sure your sister will be back before you even realize how many board games you've played." I thought of my empty house, the neat silence, the carefully planned avoidance of all things festive, the blinking cursor waiting patiently for my next clever line about the glory of sleeping alone and traveling light. I could say no. I could point to the deadline, to the move, to all the reasons I'd already lined up like dominoes. But behind all of that, a different picture hovered. Two kids in two big coats standing on my front porch, snowflakes on their eyelashes, suitcases at their feet, little boots echoing on my hallway floor, laughter getting caught in the corners of my rooms like warm air. My hand tightened a little around the mug. I took a slow breath in, then out, and listened to the quiet between my mother's words. "They'd be with me?" I asked. "In this house?" "Yes," she said gently. "They'd stay with you. I'd still be here if you needed backup over the phone, but the doctor really wants me to rest. You have that big, beautiful new place all to yourself. Seems a shame not to let it meet the family." I glanced around at the bare walls, the half-unpacked boxes, the rectangle of winter sky in the window. The house felt suddenly less like a hiding place and more like a stage waiting for its first scene. I don't know anything about entertaining kids for days, I admitted quietly. I write about what forks to use on solo vacations. I'm not exactly dad material. "You're not their dad," she said, a smile hiding behind her concern. "You're their uncle. Uncles don't have to know everything. They just have to show up, keep everyone fed, and be willing to read the same story 3 times if asked nicely." There was a tenderness in her voice that tugged at me. I remembered my own childhood Decembers, the feeling of falling asleep in the back seat of the car on the way home from her parents' house, the murmur of adult voices in the front, the blur of streetlights through half-closed eyes. The deep, unquestioning sense of being carried, of being safe. Maybe this was how that feeling got passed along. One tired grown-up at a time, saying yes when it would be easier to say no. I swallowed. "Where are they now?" She said, "At my place. We thought the storm in Norway would clear faster, so your sister had them fly here on time. I've had them for a day or 2 already. We've been having a lovely time, but I can feel myself tiring out. I don't want to risk getting them sick if this turns into something more than a silly winter bug." Her voice roughened on the last words, and a small knot formed between my ribs. "I can come get them," I heard myself say, more quietly than I expected. "This afternoon?" There was a soft exhale on the other end of the line, like air slipping out of a balloon that had been held too tight. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "thank you. You're doing a good thing. They're going to be so excited." "Let's not oversell it," I said, trying for lightness. "I'm operating at a basic toast and cartoons skill level." "Kids love toast and cartoons," she replied firmly. "You'll be fine. Make a list if it helps." A list? That, at least, was familiar territory. "Okay," I said. "I'll finish a few things here, then drive over. Tell them—" I hesitated, feeling suddenly shy with my own family. "Tell them Uncle Eric could use some expert help making this place feel less like a shoebox," I finished. She laughed, then coughed lightly, the sound muffled. She said, "I'll tell them. Drive safe, all right? And Eric—" "Yeah?" "I'm proud of you." The words landed softly, like feathers on the folded blanket in my chest, making it just a bit lighter. I said, "Thanks, Mom. I'll see you in a few hours." When the call ended, the kitchen felt different. Not louder, not busier, just fuller. As if the idea of two small people had already expanded the air somehow. I set the phone down and took another slow sip of tea, aware of the way the warmth slid down my throat, settling into my chest. My mind tried to jump ahead, to packing bags of snacks, to finding extra blankets, to Googling activities for kids stuck indoors, but I brought it gently back to the moment. One thing at a time. One breath at a time. I rinsed the mug, wiped down the counter, and walked into the living room. The folding table with my laptop waited in the corner like a polite question. I opened it, woke the screen, and stared at the 3 lonely sentences. They were clever, polished, on brand. They sounded like a man who chose solitude because he believed it was the best thing he could do for himself. I read them twice, then highlighted the whole paragraph and pressed delete. The cursor blinked at me, patient. The empty page didn't feel accusing. It felt possible. I didn't start anything new. Not yet. Instead, I closed the lid gently and let the idea of the new book drift to the back of my mind, like a candle set on a far shelf. It would still be there when I came back. Right now, I had other shelves to fill. I spent the next hour putting the house into what I decided to call kid-safe, emotionally questionable order. I moved a stack of heavy books off the coffee table and onto a lower shelf. I cleared a corner of the living room floor, imagining it as a possible base camp for puzzles or building blocks. In the hallway bathroom, I straightened towels and made sure the soap dispenser actually had soap in it. Little, practical things. Each one small, almost invisible on its own, but together they made the space feel ready. Like I was quietly telling the house, "We're expecting company. Be kind." As I worked, my movement slowed from the brisk efficiency of unpacking to something gentler, more deliberate. I found myself pausing to look out the windows, noticing how the light changed as the morning advanced, how the clouds moved lazily across the pale sky. My breathing settled into a rhythm that matched the unhurried pace of the day outside. When I finally grabbed my jacket and keys, the house felt less like a hiding place and more like a blank page. Not empty, just waiting. On my way out, I glanced at the coil of extension cords and the unopened box of outdoor lights Conrad had left by my front steps sometime after I'd gone to bed. There was a sticky note on top, his handwriting big and cheerful. In case you decide to join the constellation, from C. I smiled despite myself, tucked the note into my pocket, and locked the door. The air outside was crisp and cool, brushing gently against my face as I walked to the car. I took one long, steadying breath, feeling the cold fill my lungs, then let it out in a slow stream that faded into the quiet of the street. By the time I slid behind the wheel, I wasn't entirely sure who I'd be by the time I came back. But as the engine turned over and the heater began its soft work, I knew this much. When I returned, I wouldn't be returning alone. And for the first time in a long while, that thought didn't make my chest tighten. It made it feel just a little bit wider, like there was room in there for something new. Kids have a way of changing the sound of a house before they even walk through the door. I noticed it when I pulled into my mother's driveway. From outside, with the engine still running, I could already faintly hear something that wasn't there in my own place. A kind of layered noise made of laughter, small feet hitting the floor, and the rise and fall of cartoon voices from a TV turned a little too loud. Underneath it all was the steady rhythm of a home that had done this many times before. I turned off the car and sat for a second with my hands on the steering wheel, feeling the quiet settle around me. In, slow breath. Out, longer breath. The air inside the car had that faint fabric and heater smell that comes from winter driving. When I stepped out, the cold greeted me with a soft bite on my cheeks and the tip of my nose. The sky was the kind of pale, flat gray that made the world feel gently muted. Not gloomy, just wrapped in cotton. As I walked up the familiar front path, the chill under my coat actually helped. It kept my head clear, my steps steady. I barely had time to ring the doorbell. The door flew open and there was Chelsea, eyes wide, hair slightly messy the way it always got when she'd been rolling around on the carpet. She wore a sweater with a snowman on it and one sleeve pushed up higher than the other. "Uncle Eric!" The way she said my name, full volume, full heart, hit me harder than I expected. Before I could answer, she threw herself at me, arms going around my middle. I staggered back half a step, then instinct kicked in and I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the small, warm weight of her against me. "Well, that answers the 'will they be excited' question," I murmured into her hair. A second later, someone smaller and quieter attached himself to my leg. I glanced down to see Liam, pressing his face into my jeans, one small hand holding onto my coat as if I might try to drift away like a balloon. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. The way he leaned into me said it all. "Hey, buddy," I said gently. "Good to see you both." My mother appeared behind them, one hand on the door frame, the other clutching a tissue. She looked as she had sounded, tired around the eyes and a little pale, but still unmistakably herself. Her sweater was soft blue, the color she always wore when she wanted to look Not sick, just a bit under the weather. Okay, she said hoarsely, smiling. Let your poor uncle breathe. Chelsea stepped back reluctantly, but kept her hand wrapped around my wrist. Liam loosened his grip on my leg, but didn't move far, staying close enough that his shoulder brushed against my knee. You made it, Mom said. Her voice was rough, but her eyes were bright. Come in, it's freezing out there. Inside, the warmth wrapped around me immediately. The house smelled like the things it had always smelled like in December. Cinnamon, laundry detergent, and a hint of pine from the small artificial tree in the corner of the living room. The tree was already half decorated, lights wound carefully, but ornaments hanging mostly on the lower branches where small hands could reach. In the background, a cartoon character laughed in a high looping giggle from the TV. The sound was bright, but not sharp, the kind of noise that would normally make me want to turn down the volume, but here, somehow, just felt like part of the landscape. We moved to the living room in a small cluster. I shrugged off my coat with my free arm while Chelsea tugged me toward the couch, as if afraid I might change my mind and bolt. Liam followed silently, still holding on to the side of my jacket. You're really taking us, right? Chelsea asked, eyes wide and serious now that the first wave of excitement had passed. Mom said you'd take care of us till they get back, but sometimes grown-ups say we'll see when it's actually no. I glanced over at my mother, who lifted an eyebrow at me as if to say, well? I looked back at Chelsea. Her face was so open, so expectant that the answer came easily. I am really taking you. If you're willing to help me, my house is new and very boring. It needs experts. Experts like us? She said, straightening. Especially like you, I confirmed. Beside me, Liam looked up with quiet interest. What about cartoons? He asked in a small voice. You have those? I have the internet, I said solemnly, which means I have access to every cartoon that has ever existed, including some that probably shouldn't have. He thought about that for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. My mother sank down onto the armchair by the window, moving carefully, as if every motion cost just a little more than usual. She studied the three of us with a soft, full look that made something in my chest loosen another notch. See, she said, already a team. We spent the next half hour doing what families do when they're about to make a small but important transfer of responsibility, moving bags from one room to another, discussing snacks, and reassuring everyone involved that it would all be fine. Chelsea's suitcase was pink, with stickers on it that told the story of her last few years in miniature. A cartoon cat, a unicorn, a faded roller coaster logo, a small peeling sticker of a book. Liam's bag was blue with tiny planets and stars. He was very careful about which side touched the floor. Do you have a Christmas tree, Uncle Eric? Chelsea asked as she zipped up her coat a little later. We were clustered by the front door now, the three of us putting on layers while my mother leaned against the hall table and watched. Not yet, I admitted. I just moved in. I have boxes and a kettle and an impressive collection of dust I tracked in while moving furniture. No tree, she repeated, eyes wide. None? Not even a tiny one? Liam added, equally alarmed. Wow, you two are really selling this I need help angle. My mother coughed, then smoothed a hand over Liam's hair. Maybe, she suggested gently, finding a tree could be one of your first adventures together. There are lots of places still open. Chelsea turned back to me, suddenly radiant with purpose. Can we? Can we help you pick one? We know all about trees. Dad taught us the shake test and the needle test and the no trees that look like they're already sad test. I paused, letting the idea bloom slowly in my mind. My house without a tree had felt like a statement, an empty corner where something should be. Inviting a tree in, especially with them, felt like saying yes to more than just greenery. But I thought about their faces, about the way their eyes had flicked to each other when they heard no tree, as if sharing a tiny silent panic. I thought about my own childhood, how serious the tree had always felt, like the starting flag for the whole season. "Okay," I said at last. "Tree Selection Committee, I officially request your professional services." Chelsea let out a sound that was half cheer, half gasp. Liam smiled, small but unmistakable. "That's my cue to go lie down before I start crying all over everyone," my mother said, dabbing at the corner of one eye with her tissue. "Call when you get home, please, and send me a picture of the tree. I want to see what the experts choose." I hugged her gently, careful not to squeeze too tight. Up close, I could feel the slight heat in her skin that told me the doctor had been right. She really did need to rest. "You sure you're okay?" I murmured. "I will be now," she whispered back. "Go on, take my grandkids to corrupt your bachelor ways." "They're 8 and 6, I whispered. "How corrupt can they be?" She just smiled, patted my cheek, and shooed us toward the door. Outside, the world had brightened a little bit. The clouds were still thick, but there was a sheen to them now. A brightness that suggested snow might arrive later if it felt like it. The air was cold enough to nip at our noses, but not so harsh that it chased us inside. I loaded suitcases into the trunk while Chelsea narrated the process like a sports commentator. "And now Uncle Eric is putting the world's most important bags into the car," she said. "And he is double-checking the zippers and the wheels and making sure nothing will fall out because he is a responsible adult who knows what he's doing." "That seems like a generous interpretation," I replied, closing the trunk. Liam climbed carefully into the back seat, concentrating hard on buckling his seatbelt. I waited until I heard the soft click, then checked it anyway, not because I doubted him, but because some ancient instinct in me had suddenly woken up and started pacing. As we pulled away from my mother's house, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Chelsea was pressed up against the window, watching the neighborhood slide past. Liam sat more centered, feet swinging, eyes flicking between his sister and the world outside. "You okay back there?" I asked. "Yep," Chelsea said easily. "We've never stayed at your house before. Mom says it's very grown up. Does that mean no fun?" "It means," I chose my words, "that so far it hasn't had the right kind of people in it, which is about to change." "Oh," she said, satisfied. "Good." For a few minutes the car was quiet, except for the low sound of the heater and the soft swoosh of the tires on the road. I let the rhythm of it calm my nerves. In, out. Hands relaxed on the wheel. "Uncle Eric?" Liam's voice was small but clear. "Yeah, buddy?" "Do you have night lights?" The question caught me off guard. I thought of my bedroom, dark and quiet at night, lit only by the faint glow from the street outside. Of the hallway, still unfamiliar even to me when I got up for water. "Not yet," I admitted, But that seems like something we can fix pretty quickly. Do you like lights shaped like something? Stars? Animals? He considered, then nodded. Stars, he said. And maybe one that's just a little circle, not too bright. I can work with that. We'll make sure your room is the exact right amount of cozy. I meant it as reassurance for him, but I felt it settle inside me too. The idea of building small pockets of safety in my house. Night lights, soft corners, warm blankets, felt unexpectedly right. We picked up a Christmas tree from a small lot that appeared like it did every year in the parking lot of a hardware store. Rows of evergreens stood in neat lines, their branches frosted with the fine mist of earlier flurries. The air was filled with the clean, sharp scent of pine. "Remember," Chelsea said, as we walked between the trees, "we don't pick any that look like they're already sad." "And we don't pick one taller than the ceiling," Liam added, seriously. "Well, that takes the 15-footer off the table," I said, glancing at a giant tree that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. We moved slowly, the three of us considering each tree like it was a potential new roommate. Chelsea pushed lightly at branches, testing their bounce. Liam examined the trunks, frowning in concentration. "This one," he said, eventually, pointing to a medium-sized tree with sturdy branches and a slightly uneven top. "It's not too skinny and not too pokey." I ran a hand along one of the branches. The needles were soft but firm, and it smelled like every good December I'd ever had. "What do you think, expert number 2?" I asked Chelsea. She circled it slowly, arms crossed, then stopped and nodded. "It looks like it's trying its best, and it's not perfect, but that's okay because we are not either." My throat tightened just a little. "Sold," I said quietly. We got the tree tied to the roof with the help of a patient teenager in a red hat. Back in the car, the scent of pine wrapped itself around us like an invisible garland. The kids chattered about ornament strategies on the drive back to my house, their plans growing more elaborate with every mile. By the time we pulled into my driveway, it felt like we'd been a team for much longer than a single afternoon. As we stepped out of the car, I heard the familiar sound of someone nearby wrestling with a box of decorations. Sure enough, Conrad emerged from his front door carrying a coil of lights over one shoulder like it was some kind of festive lasso. He took in the tree on my roof, the two small figures at my side, and my slightly dazed expression. A slow, pleased smile spread across his face. "Well, well," he called, walking towards us. "Looks like the quiet new neighbor just got a lot less quiet." "Uncle Eric, who's that?" Chelsea whispered, gripping my sleeve. "That," I said, just loud enough for him to hear, "is our local ambassador of festive overachievement." Conrad laughed. "I'll take it. And you must be the famous niece and nephew I've been hearing from your grandmother." He crouched down a little, making himself smaller, less overwhelming. "I'm Conrad," he said. "I live next door. I'm in charge of bad jokes and spare extension cords." Chelsea giggled. Liam studied him for a moment, then seemed to decide he passed some internal test and gave a small wave. "We're helping Uncle Eric," Chelsea announced proudly. "He didn't have a tree, but now he does, and we're going to fix his house." "Ambitious," he said gravely. "I fully support this project. If you need extra lights, you know where to find me." He straightened and looked at me, his eyes warm. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. I glanced at the kids, then back at him. Somewhere between the tree lot and here, the anxiety that had buzzed under my skin all morning had shifted into something else. Tired, yes. Overwhelmed, maybe. But also settled. "I think so," I said. "We're going to see how my house handles actual human beings." "It'll do fine," he said. "Houses like being lived in. You can tell. They stand up a little straighter." I wasn't sure if that was true, but as we wrestled the tree off the roof and carried it toward my front door, one adult, two kids, one door that took a little coaxing to open wide enough, it did feel as if the house was, in some quiet way, bracing itself. Not against us, but for us. Inside, the air felt cooler than my mother's place, but full of its own soft potential. The kids stepped over the threshold and froze, looking around with the solemnity of explorers entering new territory. "Whoa," Chelsea breathed. "It's so empty." "Echoey," Liam added, clapping his hands gently to test it. "I know," I said, suddenly seeing it through their eyes. "I was thinking it could use a little help." We set the tree in the corner near the front window. While I wrestled with the stand and tried to get it straight, the kids walked slowly around the room, inspecting things. Chelsea peered out the window at the street, taking in the neighboring houses, the scattered lights, the way the sky was starting to dim. Liam knelt to touch the rug, then stood and ran a hand along the wall as if checking for invisible patterns. "When we're done," Chelsea said finally, "it's not going to look empty anymore. It's going to look like people live here." "Good," I said quietly. "That's what I was hoping for." We spent the rest of the afternoon in a kind of gentle, comfortable chaos. I found the one box of old ornaments I'd brought from my previous place and let the kids unwrap each one as if it were a relic. We discovered that I owned exactly 2 strands of lights that weren't tangled beyond rescue. We took a break for grilled cheese and tomato soup at the small table by the kitchen window. The 3 of us hunched over our bowls, steam fogging the glass. At some point, the sky outside slipped from gray to a deep, velvety blue. The neighborhood lights clicked on one by one, small blooms of color in the growing dark. Inside, our own tree stood in the corner, only halfway decorated, lights glowing warmly, a few ornaments clustered near the bottom where small hands could reach. "We can finish tomorrow," I said when I saw Liam rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. "Trees like being decorated in stages. Gives them time to get used to their new outfits." He smiled sleepily at that, and Chelsea yawned so wide I could practically see her whole day inside it. As I guided them down the hallway to the rooms I'd hastily prepared, I felt the weight of their trust in every step. 2 small people in a new house, letting me be the one who turned on their night lights and tucked in their blankets. We settled them into bed, Chelsea in the room with the window that faced the street, Liam in the smaller room beside it. Soft star-shaped night lights glowed against the walls, casting faint patterns that moved with every shift of their breathing. "Uncle Eric?" whispered Chelsea as I stood in the doorway. "Yeah." "Tomorrow can we show you all our traditions?" I leaned against the frame, letting her question hang in the warm, dim air for a moment. In the past, the word traditions had felt heavy to me, loaded with expectations and memories that hurt more than they helped. But here, in this quiet hallway, with the sound of small, steady breaths just beginning to slow, it sounded different. "Yeah," I said softly, "I think I'd like that." Liam's voice floated from the next room, already thick with sleep. "Good night, Uncle Eric." "Good night, buddy." I turned off the hall light, leaving only the gentle glow from the night lights and the faint spill of illumination from the tree in the living room. For a long time, I just stood there, listening to the almost silence. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was holding something precious and fragile and incredibly ordinary. The kind of ordinary that makes life feel suddenly, quietly, full. In the living room, I sank down on the couch with the blanket over my knees and let my body finally register how tired it was. Outside, a dusting of new snow had begun to fall, drifting slowly past the window, softening the edges of the world. My eyes grew heavy, my breathing slowed to match the gentle rise and fall of the quiet house. And somewhere between one breath and the next, with the tree lights blinking lazily in the corner and the muffled sound of distant carols from a neighbor's radio, I realized that my life, no matter what my next book said, had just taken a turn I hadn't planned for. It didn't feel like a crisis. It felt like a door opening in a room I hadn't known was there. The next morning began with the soft thud of small feet hitting the floor. For a few seconds, in that gentle space between sleep and wakefulness, I forgot I wasn't alone in the house. I lay there listening, eyes still closed, as the sounds arranged themselves into a new pattern. A bedroom door opening with a tiny creak, the quiet rush of whispers, and the muffled giggle that happens when children are trying very hard not to be heard. I turned my head on the pillow and watched the dim light pressing at the curtains. The sky outside had that pale, wintry brightness that meant the sun was technically up, even if it didn't feel quite committed to the idea. I took a slow breath in, held it for a moment, and let it out, feeling my body remember that it didn't need to rush anywhere. The whispers came closer. There was a small bump against the wall in the hallway, followed by an exaggerated shh from Chelsea. I smiled. A second later, there was a hesitant knock on my door. 2 soft taps, then a pause, then one more, as if they had to confer on the pattern. "Come in," I said quietly. The door opened a few inches, and 2 faces appeared in the gap, one above the other. Chelsea's hair was even wilder than usual, sticking up in soft waves, and Liam's pajamas were twisted a little from sleep. "Good morning," I said. "Is there a fire?" "No," Chelsea replied immediately. "But there is a morning." "Very serious situation," I agreed. "What time is it?" She stepped into the room, checked the digital clock on my nightstand, and squinted. "It's 8:09, she announced proudly. "That's a respectable hour," I said, sitting up and running my hand through my hair. "I've definitely been awake since 8:08. Liam padded in behind her and climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, sitting cross-legged and watching me with solemn curiosity. He looked like he was still half in his dreams, his eyes a little unfocused, his movements slow. "We didn't know if your house had breakfast," he said. "Oh, it does," I assured him. "It specializes in toast and scrambled eggs of unpredictable quality." Chelsea's eyes lit up. "And hot chocolate?" I thought of my pantry, which currently contained coffee, tea, a box of crackers, and one confused can of soup. "Okay," I said, leaning against the doorway. "Here's the situation. We can do toast and eggs now, and then go on a hot chocolate and grocery adventure. How does that sound?" "Adventure is good," Chelsea said immediately. "Especially if it includes marshmallows." "Can't promise marshmallows," I said, "but we can put it on the official mission list." I made breakfast slowly, talking them through each step as if I were hosting a very calm cooking show. Butter in the pan, eggs whisked with a fork, bread into the toaster with the kind of reverence that made them giggle. The smell of warm toast and eggs soon drifted through the house, softening its edges even more. We ate at the little kitchen table again, knees bumping under the wood. Chelsea swung her feet and narrated her dreams, which involved flying reindeer who moonlighted as school bus drivers. Liam focused on his plate, then occasionally looked up with a small, shy smile that felt like a reward every time. After we'd cleaned up and put on proper clothes and layers, we ventured out into the day. The air had grown colder, the sky heavier with unfallen snow. Our breath came out in small white clouds as we walked down the front path. I locked the door behind us, feeling again that odd, quiet awareness that the house would be here when we returned. Still warm, still waiting. We could have driven to the store, but the kids' eyes lit up when I suggested we walk to the small market a few blocks away. So we did. 1 adult, 2 kids, 3 sets of footprints pressed softly into the thin dusting of snow on the sidewalk. They took turns holding my hands. Sometimes both of them grabbed the same one, and we moved in an uneven, slightly wobbly line that made us all laugh. Cars passed occasionally, their tires whispering over the road. Somewhere, a snowblower droned in the distance. We reached the corner where the small row of shops started: bakery, coffee place, florist, and the little market with its fogged-up windows and hand-lettered "Hot Cocoa Mix on Sale" sign. "See," I said, "the universe is on our side." Inside, the store was warm and smelled like coffee, oranges, and something sweet baking somewhere unseen. We wound our way through the aisles with a short but enthusiastic list: cocoa, milk, cereal, fruit, some snacks, and at the kids' insistence, a bag of tiny marshmallows they treated as a sacred object. At the checkout, the cashier smiled at us in that quiet, knowing way that said she'd seen countless families come through like this. I realized she probably recognized my niece and nephew from previous visits with my mother. It struck me how I was the new piece in this picture, even though they were the ones in the new house with me. As we stepped back onto the sidewalk, juggling bags and mittened hands, I almost didn't notice the sound at first. A line of soft, clear notes drifted into the cold air. Violin music. Delicate but sure, coming from somewhere just down the street. The kids heard it before I named it. "Music," Liam whispered, his hand tightening around mine. Real music, Chelsea added, eyes bright. It's not on a speaker. It's like the sound is walking around. We followed it without really discussing it, drawn the way you followed the smell of fresh bread. The music grew slightly louder as we approached a small brick building with a blue door and a simple painted sign. April Lane, violin and strings. In the front window, a wreath hung with a ribbon the color of cranberries. Through the glass we could see the glow of warm light and the suggestion of motion, like someone moving slowly just out of view. The music stopped, and a moment later the door opened. A woman stepped out onto the small front step, a violin in one hand, and a dark green scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. Her breath came out in little puffs as she adjusted her scarf with her free hand. Her hair, soft chestnut brown, was pulled back in a low bun, with a few loose strands framing her face. She noticed us almost immediately. Her eyes, green, warm, attentive, flicked from the kids to the grocery bags to me, and then her mouth curved into a gentle smile. "Hello," she said, voice soft but clear. "Nice day for walking, if you ignore the part where your nose freezes." Chelsea smiled back, unbothered by introductions. "We're on a mission," she informed her. "Hot chocolate and marshmallows, and also we picked a tree." "High priorities," she said. "I approve completely." Her gaze settled on me again, curious, kind, but not intrusive. "You must be the new neighbor," she added. "Eric, right?" Hearing my name from someone I'd never met felt strangely intimate, but then I remembered Conrad and his love of updates. "That's me," I said. "So the neighborhood ambassador has been busy." She laughed, a light, musical sound that matched the instrument in her hand. "Conrad does enjoy making sure no one remains mysterious for long. I'm April. I live a few houses down from you, the one with the violin wreath, which, in retrospect, might have been too on the nose." "I like it," Chelsea said immediately. "It tells you what you're about." "Branding," I murmured. "She gets it." April's eyes crinkled with amusement. "And these two, I assume, are the famous niece and nephew?" "I'm Chelsea, and this is Liam. We're helping Uncle Eric fix his house because it was too empty and it had no tree and no hot chocolate." April looked at me with a softness that made my chest feel both lighter and more exposed. "Well," she said, "sounds like it's in very good hands now." She shifted the violin case strap on her shoulder. "I was just about to make some tea between lessons," she added, then hesitated, as if choosing her next words carefully. "If you ever want to stop by with these two, I do a very informal mini music time sometimes. Nothing big, a few carols, letting kids hear instruments up close, helps them not be afraid of them." Chelsea's eyes widened. "Can we, Uncle Eric, please?" I found myself nodding before I'd thought it through. "Sure," I said, "as long as we don't interrupt actual paying customers." April shook her head. "Half of teaching is just being here," she said. "Sometimes having extra listeners makes it better. No pressure, though. You're still settling in." There was that phrase again, settling in. It felt gentler coming from her, like an invitation rather than an expectation. "We'll try not to contribute too much to professional chaos," I said. "Today's big task is decorating the rest of our tree and not burning the hot chocolate." "Stir gently," she advised solemnly, "and if all else fails, add more marshmallows." That's my philosophy for life now, I said. We shared a small, quiet smile, the kind that doesn't demand anything, just acknowledges something unspoken. Well, she said, backing toward the door, I should get inside before my fingers forget how to play. It was nice to officially meet you all. You too, I replied. We'll wave mysteriously when we walk by now, so it feels like we're in a very low-stakes spy movie. I'd like that, she said, her eyes brightening. Have a good morning, Eric. You too, experts. She disappeared back inside, the bell over the door giving a soft jingle as it closed. A moment later, the music began again. Soft, clear notes winding into the cold air, following us back toward home. As we walked, Chelsea slipped her hand into mine. Do you like her? She asked, in a casual tone that wasn't casual. She seems very nice, I said truthfully, and very brave letting people hear her play through big windows. It sounded like a movie, Liam said quietly on my other side, like the part where something good is going to happen later. I glanced down at him, surprised by the way he'd put it. Something about his words lodged gently in my chest. Maybe it is that part, I said. Back at the house, the day unfolded in soft, manageable pieces. We unpacked groceries and made the first official batch of hot chocolate, stirring carefully as instructed. The warmth of the mugs between our hands felt like an extra layer of clothing. Marshmallows bobbed lazily on the surface, like tiny drifting clouds. We put on quiet music, the kind with soft pianos and gentle jingling bells in the background, and finished decorating the tree. Chelsea took charge of ornament placement, narrating each choice. Liam handled the lower branches with great concentration, occasionally stepping back to assess his work with a small, satisfied nod. At one point, I caught my reflection in the dark window behind the tree. A man in a soft sweater, slightly tousled hair, 2 kids flanking him, all 3 of us lit by the glow of colored lights. For a moment, it disoriented me. I looked like a version of myself from another life, one I'd never quite believed I'd step into. The strange thing was, it didn't feel like an imposter shot. It felt possible, like a rehearsal for something that might be real. As the afternoon drifted into evening, the kids grew sleepier, their movements slowing, their laughter softer and closer to yawns. We talked to my mother on video call, showing her the tree and the hot chocolate mugs and, at Chelsea's insistence, the very cool night lights. Mom's face looked a little less pale on the screen, her eyes bright with emotion. She tried to keep gentle. "You did good," she told me quietly when the kids left the room to find their pajamas. Her voice was still rough, but the pride in it was clear. After we said goodnight to her and tucked the kids in, the house fell into that particular kind of evening stillness that only arrives when children are finally asleep. It wasn't emptiness. It was a full, resting quiet, the sound of a day well used, a space holding more than it had when it woke up. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood lights twinkle in the fresh layer of snow. From somewhere down the street came the faint sound of music again, someone's playlist this time. Soft carols floating on the cold air. My thoughts drifted, unhurried, returning now and then to the image of April standing in the doorway of her studio, violin in hand, eyes kind and curious. I imagined the sound of that music filling my living room, mingling with the kids' voices, with the crackle of a fireplace I didn't have, but could always add. The idea didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like a scene I hadn't reached in the story yet. I let my eyes close for a moment and focused on the rhythm of my breathing, matching it to the slow blink of the tree lights. In, out. Warmth in my hands, from the mug. Softness under me, from the couch. The faint, steady reassurance of small sleeping people just down the hall. Tomorrow would bring its own small missions, more walks, more questions, maybe even one of those music times at April's studio. I didn't know exactly how it would all fall into place, but for the first time in a long while, not knowing didn't make me feel restless. It made me feel quietly, cautiously hopeful. And as the house settled around me, as snow drifted silently past the windows and the last of the day's noise faded into a hush, I realized that something inside me had shifted again, not with a crash, but with the soft, almost inaudible sound of someone sliding a new book onto an almost empty shelf. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house when kids are at school. It's not the same as the quiet of an empty place. It's softer, somehow. Like the echo of their voices is still hanging in the corners, resting until they come back. On Monday morning, after a weekend of tree decorating, hot chocolate experiments, and an impressive number of board games, I found myself alone in my kitchen again. But it didn't feel like the kind of alone I'd known before. It felt temporary, purposeful, like an intermission instead of a final curtain. The kids had laughed in a flurry of coats and mittens with my mother's neighbor, who'd offered to do the school run while Mom was under doctor's orders to stay quiet. We'd agreed it was easier for them to stick to their usual routine during the day than come back to my house in the afternoons and evenings. They'd hugged me quickly at the door, Chelsea with her usual enthusiasm, Liam with his smaller, steady grip, and then they were gone, leaving behind the faint scent of their shampoo and the impression of their morning chatter. Now, the only sounds were the low hum of the refrigerator, the gentle tick of the heating system, and the occasional muffled car outside. The mugs from breakfast sat in the sink, waiting. The tree lights were off for now, but the shape of the branches against the window still made the room feel fuller. I wrapped my hands around a fresh cup of coffee, feeling the warmth sink into my fingers, and let my body breathe for a moment. In for 4, out for 6. The laptop on the small folding table in the living room seemed to glow in my peripheral vision, even with the lid closed. The revised deadline from my editor sat in my inbox, politely underlined in digital ink. Today, there were no excuses about moving boxes or school schedules. Today, it was just me and the question I'd been avoiding. What kind of story did I actually want to tell now? I carried the coffee into the living room and sat down, the couch cushion dipping quietly under my weight. For a few seconds, I just listened to the quiet, to my own slow breathing, to the faint memory of the kids' laughter from the day before. Then I opened the laptop. The screen bloomed into life, bright against the soft winter light. The document for the new book opened where I'd left it, completely blank. No clever opening, no polished thesis, no list of rules for how to stay emotionally untouchable. I stared at the cursor blinking in the top left corner. Once upon a time, that blinking line had thrilled me. It had meant possibility, control, the chance to build a version of myself that looked good under bookstore lighting. Now it felt more like a mirror. "Okay," I murmured. "New rules." I let my fingers rest on the keys without typing, as if they were waiting for permission from a part of me that had never been consulted before. The old book series was built on distance. Stay light, stay vague, stay free. It had worked for a long time, until my life stopped matching the advice. Standing in my new living room, with a half-folded blanket on the couch and a small pair of socks peeking out from under the coffee table, the word free didn't feel like it used to. Instead of forcing words, I closed my eyes and thought about the last few days like scenes in a movie, slowed down. Chelsea's hand finding mine as we crossed the parking lot to the tree lot. Liam's careful concentration as he hung a single red ornament on a low branch. The way my house had sounded when they played quietly in the next room, the hum of their conversation just out of focus. Without quite meaning to, I started typing. I didn't write about bachelorhood or independence or staying unencumbered. I wrote about the first night I put a nightlight in someone else's room, about standing in the hall listening to 2 small sets of breathing and realizing that my heart had changed its mind about what it wanted without asking my permission. The words came slowly at first, like someone testing the temperature of water with a toe. But they were honest, in a way my writing hadn't been in a long time. I didn't posture. I didn't perform. I just described what it felt like to be surprised by tenderness in a season I'd been avoiding for years. Every so often, I'd pause and look up. The room held me without judgment. The tree, the scattered toys, the extra shoes by the door. They all felt like evidence that my life was expanding in quiet, unplanned ways. After an hour, I realized my shoulders weren't as tight as they usually were when I wrote. My jaw wasn't clenched. I could feel the solid surface of the table under my wrists, the gentle give of the cushion against my legs. My breath was deep and even, not shallow and rushed. I leaned back and read what I'd written. It wasn't a chapter yet, more like a series of reflections, small moments linked together like a strand of lights that hadn't found the right window. But the tone was different, warmer, closer, less about telling other people how to live, and more about quietly admitting how hard it can be to change your own patterns. My phone buzzed beside the laptop. I glanced at the screen and saw my editor's name. For a second, my old reflexes fired. The urge to let it go to voicemail, to avoid, to buy more time I didn't know how to use well. But then I thought of the kids' faces when they'd promised to help me fix the house, and of my mother's voice when she'd said she was proud of me for taking them. I picked up the phone and answered. "Hey," I said. "Eric," my editor replied. Her voice was crisp, but not unkind. "Just checking in. How's the new manuscript coming?" I looked at the half-filled page on my screen. "Different," I said, honestly. "Slower, but in a good way, I think." "Different how?" I hesitated, then decided that if I was going to change on the page, I might as well start by changing the conversation. "I don't think I can write another guide to staying unattached book," I said quietly. "At least, not honestly. Life's shifted. I'm spending time with my niece and nephew. I moved into a real neighborhood. There's a Christmas tree in my living room. I'm starting to feel like the old angle doesn't fit anymore." There was a brief silence on the line. I could almost hear her recalibrating. "So, what are you writing instead?" she asked. "Something more like stories," I said slowly. "Not fiction exactly, not a straight memoir either. More like letters from a man who thought he had it all figured out and then realized he didn't. Small moments, burning toast, buying nightlights, saying yes to family when it would have been easier to say no. Less theory, more life." I waited for the pushback, the reminder about branding and expectations and market positioning. What came instead was a soft exhale. "You know," she said, "I've been wondering when you were going to call and say something like that." My eyebrows went up. "Really?" She said, "Your last touring, you sounded tired. Not physically, just of the script. Readers ask questions about loneliness, about wanting connection, and I watched you dodge anything too real. It worked, technically, but it felt like watching someone talk around the thing that actually mattered." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. She'd seen more than I'd realized. "So," she continued, "if what you're writing now is real for you, we can work with that. It might mean a shift in how we position you, but Man Who Pretended Not to Believe in Love and Then Changed His Mind is not a terrible hook." A laugh slipped out of me, surprised and genuine. I was going to pitch it as Guy Who Discovered Hot Chocolate and Children's Board Games and Realized Maybe Solitude is Overrated. "Even better," she replied. "Send me some pages when you're ready. Doesn't have to be polished, just true." There it was again, that word, true. "Okay," I said softly. "I can do that." After we hung up, I sat there for a while, letting the conversation settle. The idea that my career might be able to bend with me instead of breaking me back into my old shape was more comforting than I'd expected. I went back to the page and added a new line at the top. "This isn't a manual. It's a series of notes from a man who thought standing alone was strength, and then found out that sometimes strength is letting two small people rearrange your living room." I didn't overthink it. I just left it there, imperfect and honest. By the time the kids came back that afternoon, I had a few more pages and a feeling I hadn't associated with writing in a while. Quiet satisfaction. Not the high of finishing a chapter at 2 a.m, but the contentment of having told the truth, even just to myself. They burst through the door with pink cheeks and armfuls of school projects. The house woke up instantly. Backpacks landed near the entryway with small, soft thuds. Shoes came off in a half-organized heap. "Uncle Eric, guess what?" Chelsea announced before the door had fully closed. "We have a winter concert with real instruments, and April is going to be there because she's the music helper." "Music helper," I repeated. "That sounds very official." "We have to practice," Liam added, holding out a crumpled flyer with both hands, "and we need someone to clap." "I'm highly qualified in clapping. Long career, extensive experience." As they launched into explanations of songs and costumes and very detailed snack requirements, I caught a glimpse of my open laptop on the table. The new words on the screen glowed faintly, but they didn't pull me at me. They just sat there, peacefully, as if they knew it wasn't their time anymore. This time belonged to crayons and homework and whatever project Chelsea was already plotting to tape to my refrigerator. Later, when the afternoon had folded into evening, we walked down the block together to drop off a small thank you gift at April's studio, a bag of cookies Chelsea had helped decorate, each one more heavily iced than the last. The sky was dark now, the air crisp and full of tiny pinpricks of cold. Our boots crunched softly on the thin layer of snow. Lights glowed from windows, turning the street into a soft tunnel of warmth. Through the glass of April's studio, we could see her finishing up with a student, a little boy struggling his way through a simple carol, bow hand wobbling. She knelt beside him, her posture patient, her smile quiet but encouraging. The sound of the violin was faint through the door, but even blurred. It was beautiful. Chelsea looked up at me, eyes shining. "She makes everything sound pretty," she whispered. "Some people are good at that," I said, my voice low, "taking something messy and making it gentle." I wasn't sure if I meant the music or something else entirely. When the lesson ended and the boy left with his mother, we stepped inside, letting the soft warmth of the studio wrap around us. The room smelled faintly of rosin and something floral, maybe tea. Sheet music lay neatly stacked on a low table, and a small lamp cast a golden circle of light over a chair in the corner. April turned, her face lighting up when she saw us. "Hi there," she said. "Here to audition for the orchestra?" "We brought you cookies," Chelsea said, holding the bag out like a trophy. "Uncle Eric helped too, but we didn't let him do the icing because he's messy." "That's fair," I said. April laughed, accepting the bag with both hands as if it were something precious. "Thank you," she said. "These look wonderful. Very festive." There was a small smear of white icing on one of the cookies that strongly resembled a snowstorm. She didn't seem to mind. "We saw on the paper that you're helping with the winter concert," I added. "I'm apparently been recruited as a professional clapper." "We take our clapping very seriously," she said. "I'm glad to hear we'll have someone with a strong resume." Her eyes met mine for a moment, and there was something there, recognition maybe, not of who I'd been on the book jackets, but of the man standing here now, slightly rumpled, with a smudge of cocoa on his sleeve, and two kids leaning unconsciously toward him. "We were just practicing Jingle Bells," Liam said quietly. "Want to hear?" April glanced at the clock, then back at us. "I have 10 minutes before my next student. I'd love to." We ended up in a small semicircle, April with her violin, the kids in front of her, and me off to the side, watching. She played slowly, letting them sing along at their own pace, the notes like tiny lights strung carefully through the air. As their voices mingled with the gentle rise and fall of the melody, I felt something inside me settle even more deeply. This, I thought, was the kind of moment my old books had never made room for. There was no way to measure it, no list to write, no clever line that could capture it better than just being here, breathing it in. On the walk home, with the kids skipping ahead and our breath clouding the air in soft puffs, I realized that the new book I'd started wasn't just about discovering family. It was also about the quiet courage of letting new people in, neighbors, music teachers, anyone who might gently shift the shape of your days. Back at the house, after teeth were brushed and stories were read and nightlights were turned on, I sat alone in the living room again. The tree lights glowed softly in the corner. The laptop waited on the table, patient. I opened it and added one more line to what I'd written earlier. Sometimes, the biggest change in your life doesn't announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes, it slips in on little feet, carrying a school flyer and a bag of marshmallows, humming a carol it learned from the woman down the street. Then, I closed the laptop, turned off the main lights, and let the house breathe with me. In. Out. Quiet. Steady. Whatever story I was writing now, on the page and in my life, it was nothing like the ones I'd built my name on. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. It felt like relief. The thing about feeling more like yourself is that it also makes it harder to pretend. For a while, everything moved in a gentle rhythm. Mornings with cereal and mismatched mugs, afternoons with homework spread across my table and crayons migrating into every room. Evenings with tree lights, quiet music, and the low murmur of the neighborhood settling in around us like a blanket. In that soft pattern, it was easy to forget there was another version of my life still hovering nearby. The one with book tours and clean hotel sheets and curated dinners with someone who preferred the idea of me to the reality. Her name was Bridget. We hadn't officially broken up, we'd just drifted into that vague space where texts were more about schedules than feelings, and calls ended with "we'll figure something out" instead of plans. She knew I was moving, knew I had family stuff for a bit, but I'd been deliberately blurry on the details. It was one thing to talk about children and Christmas trees in an abstract way. It was another to admit I was spending my evenings reading the same picture book 3 times in a row by request. On Thursday afternoon, while Chelsea was finishing a carefully decorated vocabulary worksheet, and Liam was building a precarious block tower near the coffee table, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Bridget. I hesitated, then answered. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice soft so as not to disturb the fragile equilibrium of crayons and blocks. "Eric," she said, her tone bright in that way that made me picture downtown lights and polished floors. "I was starting to think you'd fallen off the grid. How's the new place?" I looked around at the scene. Paper snowflakes taped at lopsided angles to the window, a pair of tiny socks abandoned under the edge of the rug, a mug with the remnants of lukewarm cocoa on the table. "It's different," I said honestly. "Cozy, a little chaotic, but good." "Chaotic?" she repeated, amused. "Did you mislabel your minimalist artwork boxes?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that." There was a pause. the sound of traffic in the background on her end. "Listen," she said, "I'm in town next week for a few days. Meetings, a couple of parties. I thought maybe we could do dinner. There's that new place with the tasting menu. Very low lighting, very high prices. You'd love it." I pictured it clearly. Dimly lit tables, small plates arranged like art, conversations about brands and launches and what's next. I'd done that world for years. I knew how to wear the right jacket, how to tell the right stories, how to let the bachelor-lifestyle persona do the talking, while the rest of me stayed politely in the back. Before I could answer, Chelsea tugged lightly at my sleeve. Her voice was a whisper meant to be quiet, but that carried perfectly. "Uncle Eric," she said, "can you help me spell sparkle?" I covered the bottom of the phone with my hand. "1 second," I mouthed. "Earth to Eric," Bridget said, light, teasing. "Did I lose you?" "Sorry," I said, "just dealing with some background activity." "Ah," she said, "the mysterious family stuff. How's all that going? You never have kids in your place long, do you?" Something in the way she said it brushed against me the wrong way, like a sleeve snagging on a nail. "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice even, "my niece and nephew are staying with me for a bit. Their parents are stuck overseas. So my house is currently full of glitter glue and cartoon theme songs." There was a small, surprised silence. "At your place? Full time?" I said, "For now. They go to school during the day, come back here after. We're making it work." "Huh," she said slowly. I didn't picture you as the kid zone type of guy." "I didn't either," I admitted, glancing at Liam, who was now trying to balance a stuffed animal on top of his block tower. But they needed somewhere to land, and weirdly enough, I don't hate it. Another pause, this one longer. "Well," she said eventually, her tone brightening in a way that felt slightly forced. "Good for you. Temporary uncle duty. I'm sure you'll have them spoiled and returned in no time. So, dinner? We can celebrate you surviving domestic life." I looked at the kids again. Chelsea had abandoned sparkle for the moment and was now drawing something that looked like a tree with far too many ornaments. Liam's tower had finally fallen in a gentle clatter, and he was calmly rebuilding it, block by block. "I don't know what next week looks like yet," I said carefully. "Things are a little different right now. I'm not sure the tasting menu version of me is the one that's showing up these days." She laughed, a quick, disbelieving sound. "Eric, come on. It's just dinner. You can play super uncle most of the time, but the guy I met wasn't exactly a bedtime story person." "He might be turning into one," I said before I could stop myself. There was no laughter this time. "Is that supposed to be a joke?" she asked lightly, though something in the lightness was brittle. "No," I said quietly. "It's just where I am right now." She exhaled sharply. "Look, I'm all for you doing your family duty, really. It's sweet. But I like the version of you who writes about independence and last-minute trips to Paris, not the one who spends evenings cutting out paper snowflakes." Her words weren't cruel. They were simply honest in a way that drew a clear line. I couldn't fault her for that. "I get that," I said, matching her honesty. "I'm just not sure I'm that version anymore. Or at least not only that version." "Well," she said after a moment, her voice cooling a degree, "maybe we should see where you land before we make more plans then. I've got a lot on my plate anyway. We'll touch base later." "Okay," I said softly. "Take care of yourself." "You too." she replied, already half gone. The call ended with a soft click. For a moment I just sat there, phone still in my hand, listening to the faint buzz of the refrigerator and the small sounds of the kids' focused play. The conversation replayed itself in my mind, in quiet, overlapping loops. No one had shouted, no doors had slammed, but something had ended all the same. "Uncle Eric?" Chelsea's voice pulled me back. She held out her worksheet again. "Is it sparkle with L-E or L-E at the end?" L-E, like little but sparklier. She grinned and bent over her page. I slipped the phone into my pocket, feeling the shift inside me as gently as a new book sliding onto the shelf beside the others. There would be time later to mourn whatever version of my life had just closed behind me. Right now, there was a spelling word to finish and a block tower to admire. That evening, after dinner, we bundled up to walk to April's studio for the impromptu mini music time she had invited us to. Snow had finally committed to falling, drifting down in slow, patient flakes that landed on cheeks and eyelashes. The streetlights turned each flake into a tiny spark as it passed through the beams. Chelsea walked ahead, crunching fresh paths into the thin layer of snow on the sidewalk, arms spread like she was balancing on a beam only she could see. Liam stayed closer to me, his gloved hand tucked into mine, boots making soft, deliberate marks behind hers. "You look different," he said quietly after a while. "Oh?" I asked. "In what way?" "Your face. Not sad. Just thinking a lot. Kids have a way of putting things more precisely than adults sometimes." "I had a conversation," I said softly, "with someone from the old life. We may not be on exactly the same page anymore." She studied my face for a moment, not prying, just present. That can be hard, even when it's the right thing. "Yeah," I replied. "Strange thing is, it doesn't feel like a big crash. More like realizing you've been walking on the wrong street for a while, and finally turning the corner." "That's still a change," she said gently. "Your legs notice." We both watched Chelsea across the room, who was currently explaining something very seriously to another child while waving her hands for emphasis. Liam stood nearby, gently touching the case of a cello with the kind of respect usually reserved for museum pieces. "Do you ever feel like your life quietly edited itself while you weren't looking?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "All the time," she said softly. "I used to think my life would be concerts and travel and big cities. It's not that." "Do you miss it?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I get to see a kid who was afraid to even hold a bow, play their first clear note. Or I watch a parent in the back realize their child is braver than they thought. It's smaller, but it's not less." Smaller, but not less. The phrase settled somewhere deep in me. We didn't talk much more after that, which somehow felt right. The kids cugged me away to show me a poster about the winter concert. We put on boots and coats and stepped back out into the snow, the cold air kissing our faces awake. On the walk home, the neighborhood lights glowed softly under a fresh layer of white. Our footprints joined the others on the sidewalk, just 3 more paths in a quiet web of comings and goings. That night, after the house dimmed and the kids' doors closed on whispered goodnights, I sat at the small table with my laptop open and a blank document waiting. Not the book file this time. Something else. On the first line, I typed, "Today, I let go of someone who preferred the version of me who never stayed for breakfast." On the next line, I typed, "Then I watched my niece sing off-key with a room full of children and realized I'd rather be here than anywhere I used to write about." It wasn't a chapter. It wasn't even meant for anyone else yet. It was just a mirror, held up gently. I read those 2 sentences back, let out a slow breath, and closed the laptop. The tree lights blinked lazily in the corner. Somewhere outside, distant bells chimed the hour. My life didn't feel cleanly sorted or fully decided. There were still questions, still shifting pieces. But amid all that, something solid was forming. A quiet sense that I was, finally, slowly, becoming someone I hadn't given myself permission to be before. Not the man in the book jacket, not the perfectly detached bachelor, just a man in a house that was no longer empty, learning how not to be either. By the time the winter concert rolled around, the house felt like it had always expected to be this way. There were still boxes in the spare room, still a stack of framed photos leaning against the hallway wall, waiting to be hung, but the main spaces, the kitchen, the living room, the short stretch of hallway between the kids' rooms, had settled into a quiet kind of lived-in. There were scuff marks now where there hadn't been any before, a sticker half peeled off the side of a chair, and a faint trail of glitter that no vacuum on earth would ever completely erase. I didn't mind. If anything, those small, stubborn bits of life made the place feel more honest. The winter concert had given the kids a sense of gravity. They walked a little straighter that week, took extra care with their clothes in the mornings, and practiced their songs under their breath while they did other things. Even Liam, who tended to drift quietly along the edges of attention, hummed his part with a level of focus that would have impressed a professional. The night of the performance, snow was falling again. Slow, steady, delicate. The sky was a deep, velvety dark, and the world felt muffled, as if wrapped in its warmest coat. We stood in my bedroom, crowded in front of the mirror above the dresser. Chelsea wore a simple dark dress with a red ribbon at the waist, her hair pulled back with a matching clip. Liam had on a little button-down shirt and a sweater vest that made him look, in his own words, seriously concerty. I adjusted the collar of his shirt, then smoothed a wrinkle on Chelsea's sleeve. "How do we look?" she asked, spinning once. "Like people I would absolutely hire for a very important musical mission," I said. "You look nice too," Liam added, studying my reflection. I glanced at myself. Button-down shirt, soft gray sweater, dark jeans, the same coat I'd been gradually learning to like. I looked comfortable. Not polished for a photo, not rumpled from hiding at home, just like a man going somewhere that mattered to people who mattered to him. "Thanks, buddy. Shall we impress an unsuspecting gymnasium?" The school was already buzzing when we arrived, the parking lot full of cars with windows fogged from warm breath and cold glass. Inside, the gym smelled like winter coats, floor polish, and the faintest hint of crayons. Folding chairs were set up in neat rows. The stage at the far end had been transformed with simple paper snowflakes and strands of white lights. We found our way through the crowd, hanging up coats and finding seats, the low murmur of parents and grandparents forming a soft, constant backdrop. Chelsea and Liam joined their classmates at the front, casting small, quick glances back at me every few minutes like swimmers, checking to make sure the shore was still there. Nearby, I spotted April and Conrad, both standing with clusters of other adults at the side of the stage. Conrad looked gloriously on brand in a sweater with a knitted reindeer that seemed to be winking. April wore a simple dark dress and a soft cardigan, her hair pulled back loosely, and a violin case resting against her leg. When our eyes met across the room, she smiled. Warm, steady, not flashy. I felt something unclench in my chest. The concert itself was simple and imperfect in all the best ways. The kids sang too loudly in some places and too softly in others. A row of paper antlers slipped down over a couple of foreheads mid-song. Someone on the xylophone came in late and then overcorrected with great enthusiasm. Through it all, the parents watched with that particular kind of attention that softens even the tiredest faces. Phones rose occasionally to capture a moment. Shoulders pressed together shared small, wordless reactions. When it was Chelsea and Liam's class's turn, I felt my heart pick up just a little, not in an anxious way, more like the way it does when a plane you're on starts to lift off the ground. Chelsea spotted me first and gave the faintest wave, quickly dropping her hand again when she remembered the hands at your sides instruction. Liam stood on the end of the row, eyes fixed on some middle distance where, I guessed, he'd decided his nerves couldn't reach him. They started to sing. Their little voices wove into the larger sound of the group, distinct and yet part of something bigger. The carol itself was one I'd heard 1,000 times, in malls and on radios, in movies and commercials, but hearing it here, from them, made it feel like a new song, a promise instead of background noise. I clapped when everyone else clapped, but my hands also remembered what they were doing when the gym quieted between pieces, resting, warm, fingers loose, no pen, no phone, nothing to distract from the moment at hand. At the end of the concert, as people rose in waves and shuffled toward the exits, Chelsea and Liam came to the edge of the stage. Chelsea flung herself at me with all the grace and momentum of a small comet. Liam pressed into my side, arms tight around my waist. I said into Chelsea's hair, "You were amazing." And extremely on key. "We messed up one word," she confessed, pulling back, "but then we pretended we didn't." "That's show business," I said. Liam looked up at me, his eyes shy but proud. "I remembered all the claps," he said. "I noticed. Very professional clapping coordination, 10 out of 10. As we talked, April approached, violin case in hand. In the softer, post-concert light, she looked a little tired, but in a contented way, like someone who'd poured herself into something worth the effort. "You have very talented relatives," she said, smiling at the kids. "We had a very talented music helper," Chelsea replied. April's gaze shifted to me. "And a very focused audience member," she added. "You looked invested." I was under strict instructions to clap at specific moments, I said. I take my assignment seriously. Our small circle fell into easy conversation about the songs, the way the snow looked falling past the gym windows, the hot chocolate table in the hallway that had clearly been raided by several generations of sugar enthusiasts. At one point, Conrad joined us, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he said cheerfully. "First school concert as the responsible adult. That's a milestone, my friend." I only cried once internally. "That's about par for the course," he said, eyes kind. On the way home, the kids chattered about every detail of the night, reliving it with the kind of breathless precision only children can manage. I let their words wash over me, focusing on the rhythm of their voices, the crunch of snow under our boots, the glow of porch lights guiding us along the quiet street. Back at the house, after pajamas and toothbrushing and just one more story and an extra goodnight hug each, I found myself alone in the living room again. I didn't open the laptop. Not yet. Instead, I turned on only the tree lights and sat on the floor near the coffee table, my back resting against the couch. The house was full of echoes, the faint memory of carols, the sound of laughter layered over the day. It all settled into a kind of inner stillness that made my breathing slow and deep. After a while, I took my phone out of my pocket, not to scroll, but to write a message. This one wasn't for Bridget or my editor. It was for my mother. "I wish you could have seen them tonight," I typed. They were so sure of themselves. It's like they borrowed some extra bravery from the music. A moment later, her reply appeared. "Send pictures tomorrow," she wrote. "I'm so proud of all three of you." I stared at that last part for a long time. All three of you. The words wrapped around my heart slowly, like a warm scarf. That weekend, when the kids went to stay at my mother's house for 2 nights to give me a break and let her soak up some grandparent time, the house felt quieter again. But this time, the quiet wasn't heavy. It was simply a pause between notes. I used the time not to escape, but to choose. I took out the old bachelor-life-style notes, lists, outlines, half-written phrases, and went through them slowly, page by page. Some of it still made sense in a narrow way. Some of it felt like reading advice from a stranger. When I was done, I put them in a box. Not the trash, not the center of the room. Just away. A record of who I'd been, not a script for who I had to stay. Then I opened the new document on my laptop and began sketching out chapters that felt closer to the life I was actually living. On learning to boil water before you boil over. On nightlights and second chances. On letting the neighborhood in. The titles made me smile, gently. They weren't flashy. They didn't promise the world in 10 easy steps. They just sounded true. At some point on Sunday afternoon, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, April stood there, hands wrapped around a thermos, scarf tucked up around her chin, snowflakes caught in the loose strands of her hair. "Hi," she said. "I come bearing tea, and possibly an ulterior motive." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. The house felt unusually still with the kids away, but the sight of her in the doorway filled some of that space in a way that felt natural, unforced. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from our cups, the quiet between us comfortable. "What's the ulterior motive?" I asked, after a moment, smiling. She looked down at her tea, then back up at me. "I wanted to say," she began slowly, "that you seemed different after the concert. In a good way, lighter somehow. And I also wanted to check that you're okay after—" She trailed off delicately, leaving room for me to fill in the rest. "After the old life made its position clear. Yeah. I'm okay. More okay than I expected to be, honestly." She held my gaze, listening. "I think," I continued, "that I'd been trying to live two stories at once. The one everyone expected from me, and the one my life was actually trying to tell. The concert was like a spotlight on the second one." "And which one are you choosing?" she asked gently. I looked around the room, the art supplies on the sideboard, the spare chair that always seemed to be in the way but now reminded me of little legs swinging under it, the faint stain on the table from a spilled marker wash. "This one," I said simply. "Messy, small, full of crumbs and late-night tea and people who might actually need me. I think I'd like to stay here." A soft smile spread across her face, slow and genuine. "I'm glad," she said. "I like this story better too." Our eyes met and held. There was a question in that space between us, but it didn't rush. It just waited. "I need to be honest about something else," I added, my voice steady but quiet. "I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing with any of it. The kids, the book, you. I'd be worried if you were sure," she said softly. "Certainty can be very overrated." We both laughed, the sound low and easy. "No grand declarations, then?" "Not yet." "No," she agreed. "Just small, honest steps. Those tend to hold up better." We talked for a while longer, about music and writing, about teaching and deadlines, and how both of us had once imagined something louder and glossier for our lives, and how somehow we'd landed here instead. When she finally stood to leave, the sky outside had shifted toward evening again. Before she stepped over the threshold, she paused. "Eric," she said softly, "if you ever want someone to read an early chapter, not as an editor, just as a person who sees you in both of these versions, I'd be happy to." I felt something settle into place at that, like a piece that had been hovering finally finding its spot in the puzzle. "I might take you up on that," I replied. After she left, the house was quiet again, but not empty. Her presence, like the kids, left a warmth behind, a lingering echo that made the rooms feel gently occupied, even in stillness. I walked to the window and looked out at the snow, at the faint path between our houses where our footprints had overlapped in recent days. The tree lights reflected softly in the glass, framing my own reflection, a man who looked a little more like himself than the one on the book covers. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing slowly, letting my chest rise and fall in an easy rhythm. This was my Christmas now. Not the one I'd written off, not the one I'd tried to dodge, but the one that had arrived anyway, through children's voices, through a persistent neighbor, through a violin's quiet song. I didn't know exactly how everything would unfold from here. There would still be missteps and awkward conversations and pages that refused to be written. But the choice at least felt clear. I was done standing at the edge of my own life, watching. From here on out, I would step in, slowly, gently, one small, honest moment at a time. Christmas Eve arrived quietly. There were no grand countdowns, no dramatic weather reports, no last-minute scrambles for impossible gifts, just a steady unfolding of the day, like a page turned with care. The morning began with the sound of rain against the windows instead of snow, soft, persistent, tapping gently at the glass. The sky was a deep, clouded gray, and the world outside looked like it had been washed in watercolor. Inside, though, everything felt warm and bright. Chelsea and Liam padded into the kitchen in their pajamas, hair mussed from sleep, eyes still heavy but already full of expectation. The tree lights blinked lazily in the corner of the living room, tiny islands of color in the soft dimness. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon from the rolls we'd set to rise overnight, mingled with the familiar scent of coffee. "Is it today?" Chelsea asked, even though she already knew. "It is," I said, pouring batter into a pan. "Officially Christmas Eve. How does it feel?" She thought about it. "Like waiting in line for your favorite ride," she decided. "You're not on it yet, but you're close enough to hear people screaming." "Hopefully with joy," I said. Liam rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. "And hot chocolate," he added. "Christmas Eve feels like hot chocolate." I glanced at the cupboard where the cocoa mix lived now, right next to the tea and coffee, a permanent resident. "Fortunately," I said, "this house is fully stocked for that particular emotion." We moved through the morning slowly. No rush, no strict agenda, just small, simple tasks that added up to something larger. We finished wrapping the last few presents, the kids carefully placing pieces of tape as if they were sealing treasure chests. We prepped vegetables for dinner at my mother's later, carrots and potatoes and onions chopped in quiet companionship at the kitchen counter. At some point, while the oven hummed and the kids were drawing at the table, my phone buzzed with a message from my editor. "The new pages are beautiful, Eric. Raw, in the best way. If you're willing, I think we have the beginning of a very different book. Enjoy your Christmas. We'll talk in January." I read the message twice, then set the phone down. The relief that washed through me wasn't the sharp, giddy kind. It was soft, deep, like finally letting muscles relax that had been clenched for years. "What's wrong?" Chelsea asked, watching my face. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head, then correcting myself. "Actually, something very right. The people I work with like the new story I'm trying to tell." "The kid one? The one with us in it?" "The one with you very much in it." She smiled, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. Later, we drove to my mother's house, the windshield wipers moving in a gentle, rhythmic arc. The rain had lightened to a fine mist by the time we pulled into her driveway. The house glowed from within, warm light spilling softly through the curtains, wreath on the door slightly crooked, in the way it always was by this point in December. Mom looked better, color back in her cheeks, energy in her movements, though she still moved with the carefulness of someone who didn't want to push her luck. She hugged the kids for a long time, breathing them in, then pulled me into her arms with a fierceness that surprised me. "You did it," she whispered. "You took care of them. You took care of you." I felt my throat tighten. "I had help," I said. "From them, from a neighbor who owns far too many extension cords, from a violin." She smiled, eyes shining. "I can tell." The afternoon at her house passed like all the best holiday afternoons do, without anyone checking the clock too often. We played board games at the coffee table. We watched a Christmas movie none of us fully followed because we kept pausing it to tell stories or refill bowls of popcorn. We called my sister and brother-in-law on video chat, the image of them wrapped in sweaters, still half on Norway time, filling the living room. "You owe us big," my sister said. Her smile was tired and full. "You okay, little brother?" I looked at the kids curled up at my feet, at my mother in her chair, at the small, glowing tree in the corner, at the man holding the phone, whose reflection I could just see in the darkened TV screen, less polished than the one on the book jackets, more real. "I am," I said simply. "I really am." By the time we drove back to my house, the rain had stopped. The clouds had thinned just enough to let a few stars peek through, shy and distant, but present. The air was cool and damp, and smelled faintly of wet earth and pine. Inside, the house welcomed us with its familiar warmth. We changed into softer clothes. The kids put on their Christmas pajamas, matching at my mother's delighted insistence, and we settled in for the final stretch of the day. There were stockings to hang, just so, cookies to arrange on a plate for Santa, even though everyone in the room was operating with a slightly more nuanced understanding of logistics. A glass of milk on the coffee table, A small note from Chelsea and Liam, written in careful letters, thanking whoever helps with the presents for their hard work. We turned off all the lights except the tree. The room glowed in gentle color, ornaments reflecting tiny flickers of red, green, and gold. The kids leaned against me on the couch, Chelsea on my right, head on my shoulder, Liam on my left, his hand resting on my arm. "Uncle Eric," murmured Chelsea. "Yeah? Is this going to be our Christmas now?" "What do you mean?" "Like this kind," she said, waving a hand vaguely to mean the tree, the house, the walk between here and Grandma's, the cookies, the violin music still echoing faintly in memory. With you, and Grandma, and maybe April, and the neighbors, and not you far away in some city with just your suitcase. Her words landed softly but firmly, like snow that sticks. I looked down at her, at Liam, at the tree. I thought about the old Decembers, hotel rooms, airports, politely decorated rental apartments where I'd pretended not to mind the quiet. And then I thought about this one. "Yes," I said quietly, "if you want it to be, this can be our Christmas, the kind we come back to, the kind we make better every year." Liam's fingers curled around my sleeve. "Good," he said simply. We sat there for a long time, listening to nothing in particular. The faint hum of the heater, the soft tick of the clock, the steady rhythm of 3 sets of breathing slowly aligning. Outside, the world continued moving, but in here, time seemed to loosen its grip. When it was finally time for bed, we did all the small rituals with extra care. Teeth brushed, faces washed, blankets shaken out and tucked in, nightlights turned on, casting familiar, gentle shapes on the walls. I stood in the doorway of each room longer than usual. In Chelsea's, the glow from the window framed her tree-patterned pajama pants as she curled around her favorite stuffed animal. In Liam's, the soft circle of light near the floor made his small silhouette look peaceful, steady, safe. "Good night," I whispered to each of them. "Merry almost Christmas." Back in the living room, the tree lights blinked in slow patterns. I tidied the last of the day's small messes, not to erase them, just to tuck them in. A book left open on the arm of the couch, a single crayon on the floor, a sock that had somehow traveled halfway across the room without its owner. Then I made myself a cup of tea and turned off every light except the tree. The house felt full and calm. No tension humming under the surface, no sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just a gentle completeness, like the last piece of a puzzle laid into place. Not with a triumphant snap, but with a quiet, satisfying click. I sat on the couch, tea warming my hands, and let my gaze drift over the room. The tree, the stockings, the small pair of shoes by the door, the faint glow under the kids' closed doors down the hall. Somewhere outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the window. Farther away, someone's laughter floated on the night air, quickly muffled by distance and walls. I thought about the book I was writing, about the chapters half-formed in my mind, moments like tonight that didn't need to be dramatic to matter. I thought about the woman down the street with the violin, and the way her music had found its way into the rhythm of our days. I thought about my mother, probably already in bed, lying there with a quiet smile, knowing her children and grandchildren were safe and loved. And I thought about the man I'd been at the start of this month, standing in this same living room, insisting he was just here for a quiet December with no big feelings. He would have been surprised to see this version of himself. Tea instead of whiskey. Tree instead of blank space. Stockings instead of packed suitcases. But as I sat there, breathing in the scent of pine and faint cocoa and the intangible warmth of being needed, I didn't miss that old version. Not really. I set the empty mug on the table and lay down on the couch, blanket pulled over me, eyes turned toward the ceiling. The gentle, shifting glow from the tree painted soft colors across the white surface above me. My breathing slowed, deepened, matching the quiet, steady pulse of the house. In, out. The thought came, simple and clear, as I hovered on the edge of sleep. This year, I didn't run from Christmas. I walked into it. Not with fanfare or perfectly wrapped wisdom, but with open hands and a heart that had finally decided it was tired of watching the season happen to other people. And as I drifted closed, with the faint hum of the heater in my ears and the soft sense of two small sleeping presences down the hall, I realized that the real gift this year wasn't something I'd bought or wrapped or arranged. It was this: a house that no longer felt like a hiding place, a family that had grown around me in the simplest ways, a future that didn't scare me anymore, because it wasn't about staying untouched, it was about staying present. The tree lights blurred. The warmth of the blanket settled around me like a familiar story being told for the 100th time. My last waking thought was a quiet, wordless kind of gratitude. For the kids, for my mother, for the neighbor with too many lights, for the woman with the violin, for the man I was slowly, calmly becoming. Then the night folded over me gently, and the house and I slept, breathing together in the soft, steady rhythm of a Christmas finally given a chance.